Hello everyone and welcome to this new video about level design. Today we're wrapping up our mini-series of 3 videos on how to make a good tutorial. And for this last episode, we're going to talk about an important principle called difficulty ramping. By the way, if you're curious about the first episode on skill gating in tutorials, or the second episode on tails and priming, feel free to have a look over here. But anyway, today we're going to discuss difficulty and progression. We've already mentioned this several times through the series. Games are a very particular kind of media, because they are interactive multimedia artworks where players have a huge control on what happens and when. As opposed to movies or books where you're quite a passive consumer, here you actively participate to the story. But of course, this strange role of active observer means that you have to immerse yourself in the world and understand its core rules in order to work your way through the scenes and the missions. So it's important that you have some good guides teach you about the ins and outs of the game, from the most fundamental building blocks to the most sophisticated techniques. And if your game's world is dense, this might mean teaching the players quite a lot of things. Because even if gamers now share a common grammar and have some instincts about various game elements, thanks to years of experience, there is still a bunch of mechanics that are specific to your game and your world, and thus have to be explained thoroughly. Now, as we've said in the previous episodes of this mini-series, a good way to slowly bring new mechanics to the players is to pile them up one at a time, and just hint at the next step to not overflow gamers. For example, in the great roguelite Hades, there is quite the number of tricks to discover. From mastering each and every weapon, to remembering the boss patterns, getting acquainted with the boons of each god and goddess, or even discovering the role of each collectible, the game is packed with new features and learnings every step of the way. But of course, you are not asked to understand all of this in just one go. Rather, the game introduces one notion after the other and lets you gradually build your knowledge. Plus, the game uses the famous trick we talked about last time of not showing something until it's actually usable, like the weapon upgrades that only appear once you've collected the entire arsenal and gotten some special blood. However, Hades is by no means an easy game. It is voluntarily challenging from the start, with much of the base difficulty already present in your very first run. This makes sense in the context of a roguelite, but for many other genres, this would be a bit harsh for players, at least compared to their expectations. This is why a lot of games prefer to offer the tutorials in a sandboxed and protected environment. The idea is to more or less artificially decrease the difficulty of a mechanic or of the bad consequences of a failure. That's why lots of games with fight mechanics have this training session intro scene where you battle your friend or master in a little make-believe duel so as to learn the ropes of the system in a completely safe context. Similarly, most of the platformers rely on this technique to show a mechanic without discouraging the players too much. A good Mario level, for example, should expose you to new mechanics gently with no risk of instant death. And only when you've actually mastered the concept should it face you with the real difficulty and all of the nasty consequences of you failing. Decoupling the learning phase from the practice phase is interesting because it allows the players to better focus and apprehend the mechanic at first, without any pressure, and then slowly reintegrate the challenge as they train to make the mechanic their own. Because indeed, it's also very important to remember to keep the players on their toes and provide them with a real challenge during the entire game. Although momentarily calming down the pace to help gamers learn is a nice touch, you shouldn't just kill the rhythm every time a new mechanic appears. A key notion in game design is that of the difficulty curve. You've probably already seen this kind of graphs where you plot the variations of the gameplay difficulty throughout a game to try and get a bird's eye view of the overall pacing. This type of curve is crucial to establishing the balance between challenging and feasible, either for the whole game or for a single level. Usually we consider that a curve like this one is pretty good. It means that the players are introduced to your world and its rules softly, but that they constantly get new challenges and difficulties to maintain their interest. If we come back to the example of Hades, or most roguelikes and roguelites really, you often have more of a spike at the very beginning, with a little plateau afterwards, because those games want you to dive in headfirst, and then get more familiar with the gameplay as you go through runs. Conversely, plenty of strategy games have this fairly steady increasing rate in difficulty, where you are taught new systems regularly and you develop your understanding of the game piece by piece. Now, to be honest, adjusting the difficulty curve is hard, because it depends a lot on the type of game you're making. An interactive novel or a QTE-based game won't necessarily increase in difficulty, for example. They'll keep the players motivated via their narrative and their world building. A boss run game, like Bayonetta 3, is just the reverse. It's all about pumping up the difficulty and having you perform ever-increasing feats of strength until you reach an insane level of expertise. So, contrary to pacing, which we talked about in a previous episode of the series, there isn't really do's and don'ts for a game's difficulty curve. Designing this curve will shape the gameplay experience and the game's rhythm, and it is one of the key elements to convincing players to enter and learn about your world. So it's up to you to decide how you want this discovery to happen, and whether your game should be about pleasant casual exploration, hardcore dynamic actiony scenes, or some in between. To sum up, difficulty ramping is essential to introducing players to your world, because it ensures they will enjoy the ride and not get overwhelmed, but it also keeps them invested and participates to the feeling of progression. Therefore, even if it's a complex design problem, finding the right difficulty curve for your game is definitely something you should spend time crafting. Anyway, with all that said, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this quick tips and techniques tutorial about level design, and that you've now got a better idea of why picking the right difficulty curve for your game is crucial to offering good tutorial moments. And I hope you liked this mini-series on tutorial design, where we explored skill gating, tiles and priming, and finally difficulty ramping. If you did, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And of course, don't hesitate to leave a comment with your own ideas for future level design tutorials. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and take care.